Hi, and welcome to this session on EDR to XDR, how to drive faster threat response and better overall security from your endpoint security products, as well as all the other security products at your disposal. We're going to be talking about securing endpoints, no matter what kind they are or where they are in the world, all the different workplaces and workspaces that make up the modern workforce, from the beach to the boardroom. What can we do to bring our tool set together? My name is Ben Greenbaum. I'm joined by Brian McMahon. We're both with Cisco Secure. We're very happy to be here. And today we're going to be covering EPP and EDR and XDR and what do all of these acronyms actually mean and what makes an effective EDR and how do we get from EDR to XDR and why would we even want to do that? So with that, I will pass it off to my colleague, Brian McMahon. Thank you very much, Brian. Take it away.
Thanks, Ben. So let's start by unpacking some TLAs, where TLA, of course, is a TLA for three-letter acronym. And we have a fair amount of alphabet soup to make sense of here. So EPP, Endpoint Protection Platform, EDR, Endpoint Detection and Response, XDR, Extended Detection and Response. Let's take each one of these in turn. So first of all, EPP, and is that just a different way of spelling antivirus? What's the difference between AV and EPP? Well, I'm going to blame Gartner for this because the EPP Magic Quadrant is their creation, and it's sort of an industry reference. So the way they see the EPP is something that is focused on prevention, detection, and response, which already sounds suspiciously like EDR too, but we'll get back to that. And this is not something that's static. I mean, Gartner's own idea of what an EPP is has evolved over time. But one consistent theme throughout this is the EPP is focused on protection. Keep the bad stuff off the endpoint. And the way we figure out what is bad stuff has used some mix of definitive signatures and more behavioral approaches. And again, the mix there has varied over time as the technology and the threat landscape has evolved. But a lot of classic AV has always been very heavily focused on one-to-one signatures. And the end-user experience revolves around that too, right? What most people know about their AV happens whenever the database update kicks in and their PC grinds to a halt. Signatures have a few definitive advantages. One of them is that if you get a hit, whether it's a sort of byte pattern, classic AV style, or whether it's a SHA-256 hash of the file or something, if you get a match on something bad, you usually know exactly what you're looking at there. False positives do happen, right? But they're fairly rare occurrences. Of course, the problem is that it's only as good as your latest update. So a signature for something bad is never going to catch the next attack. And the bad guys know this, right? A theme throughout this is, remember, the bad guys know how this stuff works, and they take steps to not get caught. They don't want to get caught. It's bad for business. And they're pretty good at evading one-to-one signatures these days, except, of course, that one-to-one signatures still catch a lot of stuff. I mean, even a pretty bad efficacy rate for an AV is still somewhere in the 70 to 80%. And that's a lot of stuff that we've taken care of, right? That even if it's only 70%, that's a lot of stuff that we don't have to worry about. And we caught it right up front with a fairly well-established technology. But there's always been more to it than that, right? So because signatures can be evaded, there's been a mix of that and then a more heuristic behavioral approach. The trouble is, of course, that once you get away from the one-to-one matches, you start to increase your risk for false positives because, what is malicious? It's often contextual, which means that it's a great place to focus on for like modern machine learning techniques, artificial intelligence. And it's never been really a truly binary thing for most packages. There's always been some mix in there. And it's always been more than just blocking specific bad things, too. I mean, if you look at Gartner's definitions, it's more than just upfront protection. They expect an EPP to do other things to help you harden your systems, make it easier to protect. They expect it to have things that go beyond just sort of the one-to-one blocking and tackling of bad files. Things like memory-based defenses. Things like vulnerable software scans. Those are all part of the overall protection picture. All right, great. But if I've got one of these, then what's the EDR all about? Well, upfront protection inevitably will fail sooner or later. You can't be 100% right about 100% of the stuff 100% of the time. That's just too many hundreds. It's not going to work. And of course, remember, the bad guys know how this stuff works too. So if we get too good at blocking bad files, then they start finding ways into the systems that don't require files at all, right? The various fileless vectors, the various sort of living off the land techniques where they're using the legitimate things that are already installed on the system, like PowerShell, for not so legitimate purposes. So once you get to that point, you realize that you need something beyond just the keep the bad stuff off model. And the EDR, as the acronym suggests, is about detecting and responding to something. And my favorite analogy is to a smoke detector. Now, we don't want to have a fire in our house. We take steps to avoid having a fire in our house. But we still have the smoke detectors because they save lives. We have maybe sprinkler systems. We have buildings with shiny red trucks that are there to come along when prevention ultimately fails. So upfront prevention is great when you can do it, but it's never the whole story, and you need to design your systems accordingly. And again, I'll blame Gartner for this. So you can actually trace this back to a blog by one of their analysts from 2013, where he talked about this thing that he then at the time called endpoint threat detection and response. And then a couple of years later, he went back and looked and realized that the word threat had pretty much fallen off in usage, so he updated his blog accordingly. But it's about, something has already gotten in, right? The first keep the bad stuff off has been breached, and now we need to detect and respond as quickly as possible. And so inherently, this is going to focus on an incident response flow. And the things that we need to enable this are looking for indications that something has gone wrong on the system, that it is misbehaving in some way. That could be network connections, it could be file activity, it could be all kinds of different combinations of behavior patterns that we know are associated with particular attack methods or actors. And it's, again, it's not like EDR is trying to replace EPP. They work together. EPP is designed to stop stuff up front, and then EDR kicks in for the things that inevitably will eventually get missed. Now, they don't have to be separate products. And it's perfectly plausible to design something, and Cisco Secure Endpoint has always been that way, right? It's had aspects of prevention and detection and response from the very beginning. All right, great. So I have an EPP and an EDR. Now people come along with this XDR thing. What's that all about? Well, this is sort of the world of endpoint defense, right? Your endpoint defenses are like the goalkeeper in a soccer game, or for the rest of the world, association football. The goalie is your last chance to keep the ball out of the net if the bad guys get a shot on the goal. However, you have the rest of the team, too. Right? You have all the other players on the team whose job it is to keep the ball as far away from your own goal as possible, preferably on the other side of the field, so that your goalie has a very boring game. You do want to have a good goalie in case the opposition breaks through and gets a shot on the goal, but there's more to it than that. And when you take the endpoint and the rest of the team, that's when you get beyond just EDR and into XDR, and I'll hand back over to Ben for that part of the story.
Thanks, Brian. So EDR is the goalie. Got it. If all else fails, EDR is on the endpoint to stop the attack. But we're here to talk about XDR as well. And what is XDR anyhow? Extended detection and response. Why do we need that? Brian just went over all the great ways in which EDR can protect your endpoints, but it's there in case all else fails. And all else has a lot of opportunity to stop that attack. The endpoint agent only sees what the endpoint gets, only sees what gets through. But the entirety of the network sees a lot more than that. We have detections coming from firewalls, from DNS protection, from email and security web proxies, and so on. Every network security tool is out there to protect the endpoint, but XDR is what puts them on a team, gives them a coach, and allows them to talk to each other. It's not just the goalie acting alone anymore with XDR. Now, Gartner invented the acronym XDR, Extended Detection and Response, and they've published a couple of things that describe what they mean by that. I'm not going to read the whole slide here for you, but to break it down, an XDR is something that automatically collects and correlates data from multiple security products in order to improve threat detection and incident response. It provides a unified security and incident response platform, and that integration occurs at the point of deployment. It's not something that's added in later, and overall, it provides better security outcomes for you and your team. Now, you may have heard some of this before. We've got industry acronyms already, like SIM and SOAR. And what do they do, and why aren't they XDR? Well, the SIM collects data from multiple systems into one central location. Okay, fair enough. And it provides some level of correlation. A SOAR allows you to leverage multiple security products at once, but both of these are expensive add-on items with configuration and maintenance costs of their own, which goes against the XDR point of integration occurring at the point of deployment, not being something that's added in later. So how are we going to create XDR? We're going to give access to the cross-product data, not necessarily by hoarding all the data in one place, but by at least giving access to all the data from multiple sources via a single workspace. If you're interested in the distinction between gathering all the data or having access to all the data, check out my SANS talk from January of 2021, Get Your Bits Together or Don't, where I explore a little bit the difference between those two design philosophies. But the main thing is the ability to have access to that data, as well as having access to functions offered by multiple products. Now, the code that offers those protections, that code's going to be in products, but the products generally have APIs, or at least should, and therefore we can access those functions from another product, from another program, from an XDR. And it's included in products by design. It's deployed when you deploy those products. It's integrated by design. It's there from the very beginning. It's not an expensive or difficult to configure add-on item brought in later. Now, how to extend upon that definition of extended detection and response, how to XDR even better, you can really include it in the products. Make it a built-in part of the licensing. Make it something that's not an add-on, that is part of the core XDR position, but make it a default part of the product experience, something that was part of the product from the very beginning. And allow the products to access the XDR, not just the other way around. Okay, so an XDR is supposed to bring all this function, all this insight, all this intelligence from multiple products in together. Then why shouldn't those products in turn have access to that collected data set? Allow the point products that are part of your XDR solution to gain the combined functions and intelligence of the entirety of the rest of the deployed suite. And as an added bonus, we've built in automation. Our solution, SecureX, builds in an automation platform, even though that's not called out in the Gartner spec, but we're Cisco, we just like to be a little bit extra. So to continue with the sports metaphors, you wouldn't just have a goalie. You wouldn't have a team but not let them talk to each other. You wouldn't let them talk to each other but not have a coach. You wouldn't give them a coach and then not allow the coach to have any repeatable, reliable, well-documented playbooks. Now, I mentioned earlier that it was Gartner that invented the XDR acronym, and it's true that analysts invent acronyms, not technologies. These acronyms describe often something that's already been brought to market. Building an XDR takes time and investment and talent, and so companies like Cisco bring products and solutions and new ideas to the marketplace. Analysts realize a pattern in the industry across multiple providers and will give an acronym to that kind of product. And then every other company jumps on that bandwagon and says, we've got that now. We just built that thing. This is not how it works, folks. Cisco has been on this path since 2007, acquiring companies that were best of breed in their niche, in their vertical, in their market. And now we spent several years making them all play well together, starting in 2017 and continuing through to the present day. That effort is currently called SecureX. But like I said, we've been at this for a while. While every other company is running around trying to describe what they've built in the last couple of weeks as an XDR solution, we're actually continuing to develop beyond the definition of an XDR. And do we need yet another three-letter acronym? What is really the difference that distinguishes XDR from the rest of the market? We've already got a bunch of technologies. This is not just another technology to be added to the suite. When it's done well, it's a design philosophy, it's an architecture, it is a different way of looking at how data and functions should map, not to the products that bring those functions, but to the user's workflow, not to the sticker that's on the box or the UI they need to access to get to it. A holistic way of bringing all the data and all the functions together to drive those efficient and better security outcomes. Never has a security engineer thought to themselves, I wish I had more products that I had to deal with. I wish I had more interfaces to learn, more dictionaries to learn, more manuals to either read or not. What the security operator wanted was multiple capabilities. And in the heat of an incident response, it should not matter which UI they have to go into to get the job of the moment done. So I'm going to show you how SecureX makes this possible. And we're going to start off in the Talos blog. Now, Talos is Cisco's security research group. I'm using their blog as an example because it's a good source of security content, but this is something that's loaded in the browser in my example. And it could be anything that's loadable in a browser. It could be a blog from any security group. It could be a vendor announcement. It could be a government alert. It could be the web accessible management interface of any security or networking tool. It doesn't matter. We're going to use the blog as an example. And Talos researches hundreds, thousands of threats every year, and they write up these detailed documents explaining how the threat works and what the threat does. And in these documents are clues, are hints for our security analysts who are looking through this kind of information for indicators of compromise that they can use to determine if they've been breached, to do threat hunting, to find out if they are protected. And Talos is aware that this is a thing people do with security content, and so they helpfully lump all of the IOCs at the bottom in these lists here. So our security practitioner is going to start by grabbing the first one in the list, a URL, and then we're going to check against every technology we have in our SOC or in our network operations center that can detect and record a URL having been requested or having been transmitted across the wire. We're going to do this individually, generally, across every different separate technology that can do this, and we're going to do it independently for each and every URL in the list. And so we're finished with that one. We record our findings at Notepad or something, some true, proper investigative software if we're lucky, and then we're going to move on to the next. And we're going to repeat this cycle for as many indicators of compromise as there are in the entirety of the list. We finished with the URLs. Now it's time to start checking file hashes. We're going to look into what of our technologies, which parts of our stack can record the observation of a file hash, and we're going to check for this one in that list. And then we're going to check for the next one in that list, and so on. And we have this entire list to deal with. So that many indicators of compromise times the number of technologies we have at our disposal, including the number of threat intelligence data sets that we have access to via either subscription or local collection or what have you. This gets daunting, this gets tiring, and it takes up time that doesn't need to be spent because, in this example, I'm a SecureX user, and in my browser, I have the SecureX plugin. So without even needing to read this blog article, I'm going to open up the SecureX plugin at the top there of my browser window, and it's going to open up and give me a little mini overlay of SecureX. And in that mini overlay, I'm going to select the button that basically means read this article for me and tell me what I need to know to start looking for this thing in my environment. So I hit that button, and it then brings up a list of all of the observables found in the page. So 28 observables were found in this page. And I see that they're listed out, and I see that they're each given a little badge, a little icon that denotes whether they're already known to be malicious or suspicious, or maybe they're unknown, or maybe they're even known good. So I'm going to hit those buttons up top, and I'm going to select all the malicious things, all the suspicious things, all the unknown things. I'm going to leave out the clean item because I don't need to worry about whether or not someone in my environment has gone to snort.org simply because it was included in the website. I can quickly do that kind of filtering, and with everything that I've selected, I'm going to investigate this in threat response. And that brings us to the actual threat response user interface. And so here we have this investigation showing me what happened in my organization. Now, in this example environment, I've got about 26 different technologies set up. And in a single click of the button, I have now investigated 27 observables across all of those technologies. So that's a number of individual steps that I did not have to perform. And I can immediately see that I've got some local targets 3 targets. It says right there on the very left edge of the top bar, it tells me I've got 3 local targets. And in the graph, I see that I've got some items in purple. Those are my assets that I'm paid to protect, that have been seen by something in my stack having some kind of interaction with one of the 27 known threat artifacts that I'm investigating. I also see that 19 other items were returned to me as having been related in some way to my investigation. So I investigated 27 things, but as I use SecureX to reach out to each of those technologies, some of them are going to come back with additional information. Yes, I've seen that file hash. I saw it being downloaded from that URL. And that gets sent to SecureX and then shown to me. And so now there's another URL of which I was not originally aware. I saw this file come from this IP address. I saw this domain hosted at this IP address. I saw this URL get contacted because of a connection that was opened by an executable that had the following file hash. All of this is returned to me as additional bonus information, if you will. 19 of those items. I see that 6 different modules contributed to this analysis. Now, I told you I had over a couple dozen configured, but 6 of them had relevant information to share. I didn't have to inquire of each of them independently, but I see that I've got information here from Umbrella, my DNS security suite. I've got information from AMP Global Intelligence, one of the free and provided threat intelligence repositories that comes included free of charge with SecureX, whether you are an AMP customer or not. In this example, I am an AMP customer, so I see that AMP for Endpoints came back with some examples of sightings of some of these observables. Talos Intelligence. The Talos Intelligence database is another free and included threat intelligence provider that you get with just the usage of SecureX, just like AMP File Reputation, which in this example came back with 9 judgments about the file hashes that I investigated. And then my own private intelligence repository had a couple of sightings. Private intelligence is something you can use into SecureX to upload your own logs, your own information into, to store whatever you want. Now the interface is broken up into a couple of main parts, and I'm going to go over quickly. We've got the graph, probably the most eye-catching part of the display. It's what shows me the literal relationships between the different things that I've investigated. It draws me a picture of what happened in my environment and how the different observables are related to each other and the additional related items that were returned. For any of those, I can look in the investigation details panel to get more information about that one specifically. So in this case, we have an IP address highlighted, and it tells me what we know about that IP address. I've got 2 verdicts from 2 different sources on that IP address. Great. I can also then look down at the timeline to see a rendering of when did this happen across my environment. You can see in this example that activity started quite a while ago, but it's really picked up in the last week or so for some reason. And so I can see this timeline of events, and I can trace this all the way back to find out, who was patient 0? How did this threat first get into my environment? So that's an overview of the threat response interface within SecureX. In the graph or anywhere else that I've got one of these observables, so I've highlighted an IP address in the graph right now, there's a pivot menu. So I'm going to click that pivot menu and it's going to open up a menu of options that I can take. I could do things like add this IP address into my investigation. This is one of my returned items. Something said, hey, I've seen that thing you asked about in relation to this IP address. So now I've got that IP address. I can add it into my investigation. I can also take immediate response actions like blocking this IP address in firepower. I can take response actions against this IP address in ICE or in any of the other tools that I've got enabled through SecureX. I don't have to go to that user interface to get that done. Here's another example. Here is a domain. So I've got a domain highlighted in the graph right now for us to look at. I'm going to open the pivot menu on that domain. You see, again, a list of actions and various steps I can take on a domain, including the ability to immediately block this domain across my enterprise using the Umbrella Enforcement API. So Umbrella is not Firepower. Umbrella is not ICE. Umbrella is not SecureX, but it's one of the many technologies that I've harnessed into my SecureX instance. And so this is how it works. The enrichment process allows me, the operator, to send a query to SecureX Threat Response. SecureX Threat Response then federates that query out to all of the different technologies that I have embedded in my SecureX account. Those technologies have APIs. They're listening for requests from Threat Response. They then respond to those requests with the relevant information back to SecureX. SecureX then gathers all of that information, draws the literal picture I showed you earlier in the graph, and populates the rest of the investigative interface. And then I can decide what kind of response action should be taken. I can send that to Threat Response, and Threat Response will then take care of federating those out to the different technologies that are responsible for each of those different kind of responses. Now, this all works over APIs, but SecureX itself has an API and also has a mature orchestration and automation engine so that all of this can happen in an automated fashion. Your playbooks, your workflows can respond to situations in your network and then take the appropriate response actions, whether that's filing an incident ticket or literally modifying policies on the fly to block known threat actors. That's up to you, but it's all available via the API and the built-in automation engine, which is called SecureX Orchestration. So we've got some sports metaphors that we've dropped on you already, and there's so many more. What if all the players on your team could play all the positions if they needed to? Well, we've got the SecureX ribbon, which is what I was talking about earlier, about giving the products access to the XDR functions and the XDR's ability to harness the functions of all the other products. You can be in the Cisco Secure Endpoint interface and make a block rule on your firewall via the SecureX ribbon because it acts as a transit layer, acts as a broker between the capabilities and the functionality and the data and the intelligence and the insights that each product has and all of the other products in your SecureX deployment. You know, what if I could rely on playbooks to have concise how-to guides for how my team should behave? That's what I was just talking about. That's SecureX orchestration, and these playbooks can be automated. Can I add more players, even if they're from other teams? You know, this other team has a really good kicker or whatever. What if I had that kicker? Yes, we've got nearly all the positions covered with products that say Cisco right on them, but you may, in your SOC, be using a couple things that maybe don't say Cisco on them. We've got massive third-party integration support right out of the box. We've got open APIs so that support can be written if it doesn't already exist. We've got relay modules that allow you to talk to additional types of security and network intelligence and enforcement providers. And we have generic protocol support built into orchestration. So if you've got a thing, even if you wrote it yourself, if it understands FTP or HTTP, if it has a REST API, if it does SMTP, etc., you can tie it into SecureX orchestration workflows via those protocols. The bottom line is that we're saving customers time and money with XDR. Recording multiple sensors and defenses together to reduce your mean time to resolve, to reduce your adversary dwell time, to reduce the likelihood of a breach, and if there is a breach, to reduce the severity of that breach. Got a customer quote there. I've got dozens more just like it. But customers, up to 10,000 customers, just under, as of the time of this recording, just under 10,000 customers are making use of SecureX on a daily basis to allow them to get more done with the people and the tools that they've already got. Isolated solutions are yesterday. Isolated solutions are over because it means that your data is analyzed in isolation. You're missing out on important context and you're missing out on important holistic insights because you're typically only looking at the firewall data and then the endpoint data and then the DNS data and so on, except for when there's an investigation of an alert. And often that alert was generated by one of your products and you're investigating it without context of the other products being automatically added in. In SecureX, we have this thing called Incident Manager, and it handles all of this, the ability to do an investigation of an incident that's holistic, that takes into account all of the technology and all of the people that you've already paid for and that you already have and just lets them work together on a team. And even your teams may currently respond in isolation. In a large environment, you may have a firewall team, you may have an email security team, you may have an endpoint security team. How often do they talk to each other? How often do they use the same tools and have access automatically to each other's tools and insights? We're helping fix all these problems because we believe that security solutions should really empower people to investigate and respond to threats faster via automation, via tools and intelligence that were designed to work together so that it's easier and faster for you to investigate more threats. Does that mean you're going to spend half the day playing video games? Probably not. It means you're going to investigate and respond to more threats. Fewer alerts are going to get dropped on the ground. Hey, I've got some resources to close off with that you can use to learn more about SecureX. These links will provide you with additional details at various different information levels about SecureX that you can use to get a better understanding. They're all great. The bottom one there is security.cisco.com, and that's where you can actually sign up for a SecureX account on your own and get a demo of how it works and start tying in your Cisco SecureX capable tools and products that you may already have. You can also request a SecureX threat hunting workshop at the URL at the bottom of the slide or via the QR code at the top right, which is where you can get a guided, curated educational experience in a lab environment, rolling up sleeves and getting hands on the tools to combat known threats without actually needing to have those threats in your environment. Hey, that's it. Thank you very much on behalf of Brian and myself and all of Cisco Secure. Please take the time to learn a little bit more about SecureX, and thank you very much for your attention and your interest so far. Have a great time at the rest of the conference. Take care. Be secure. Bye-bye.